In the dead of night, a motorcycle's rumble breaks the silence at a remote Los Angeles gas station. Keanu Reeves, exhausted from filming, pulls in for a routine stop. But something catches his trained eye: subtle movements through grimy windows, a cashier's trembling hands, customers frozen in unnatural stillness. Drawing from years of action movie experience, Keanu realizes this isn't just another late-night scene. It's a powder keg waiting to explode. His next decision will determine whether multiple lives are saved or lost forever. The fluorescent lights of the Shell station cast an eerie glow across the empty parking lot, their buzz mixing with the quiet hum of the desert wind. Located on the outskirts of Los Angeles where the city meets the wilderness, this 24-hour stop usually served as a quiet refuge for late-night travelers and truckers seeking coffee and quick snacks. At 2 a.m., the station stood as a lonely beacon in the darkness. The surrounding buildings had long since shut down for the night, their windows dark and uninviting. Only the occasional car passed by on the nearby highway, their headlights briefly illuminating the cracked asphalt before disappearing into the night. Inside the store, the scene appeared frozen in time. 3 customers stood scattered throughout the aisles, their positions oddly static. Behind the counter, the young cashier, barely out of his teens, kept his eyes fixed on the magazine rack, his hands hidden beneath the counter. A middle-aged woman in a business suit stood motionless by the coffee machine, her cup forgotten mid-pour. Near the back, a large man in a trucker's cap examined the same shelf of chips he'd been staring at for the past 10 minutes. The security camera in the corner had stopped its usual sweep 5 minutes ago, its red light now dark. Through the fingerprint-smudged windows, the store's layout revealed itself like a stage set waiting for its players. The metallic shelves created narrow corridors leading to the register, while the refrigerator units hummed along the back wall, their glass doors reflecting the harsh overhead lighting. Keanu's motorcycle, a sleek Arch KR GT1 he'd helped design, sat parked at pump number 4, its black paint still warm from the ride. He'd spent 14 hours on the set of his latest film, performing stunts and running through complex action sequences. Those same instincts now fired warning signals in his mind as he observed the unnatural tableau through the store's windows. His trained eye caught the details others might miss: the slight tremor in the cashier's shoulders, the way the woman's coffee had overflowed onto the floor without her notice, the trucker's white-knuckled grip on the chip bag he wasn't actually reading. Years of filming action scenes had taught him to recognize the tension before chaos erupted. The night air carried an electric charge, like the moment before lightning strikes. A single car sat parked behind the station, out of view of the security cameras, its engine still ticking as it cooled. No one had entered or left the store in the past 15 minutes. Something was very wrong here, and Keanu knew the next few moments would determine whether everyone walked away alive. Keanu reached for the gas pump, his movements deliberate and unhurried despite the growing urgency in his gut. The screen prompted for payment, its green digits flickering in the night. He needed a reason to go inside, to get closer to the situation without raising suspicion. His time on John Wick had taught him more than just choreographed fights. It had shown him how to read a room, how to spot the telltale signs of imminent violence. The credit card reader wasn't working. Perfect. A legitimate reason to enter the store. Keanu removed his helmet slowly, using the movement to scan the parking lot once more. The hidden car behind the building bothered him, its position deliberately chosen to avoid the cameras. He'd noticed fresh tire marks on the asphalt, suggesting a hasty parking job. As he approached the store's entrance, the fluorescent lights revealed more details through the windows. The cashier's name tag read Mike, and the young man's eyes darted toward Keanu before quickly looking away. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple despite the cool night air. The woman at the coffee station hadn't moved an inch, her designer suit wrinkled from hours of wear, likely heading home from a late night at the office. The trucker by the chips had positioned himself with a clear view of both the front door and the register. The bell chimed as Keanu pushed open the door. The sound felt unnaturally loud in the static atmosphere. "Card readers not working at pump 4, he said, keeping his voice casual, his posture relaxed. His peripheral vision caught a slight movement near the store's back office. Another figure, previously hidden from view. Mike the cashier started to speak, his voice cracking. I can't." A subtle shake of his head, a warning in his eyes. Beneath the counter, Keanu noticed the boy's hands weren't just hidden, they were bound with zip ties. The woman at the coffee station remained frozen, but now Keanu could see her shoulders trembling. A small puddle of coffee had spread across the floor, the liquid long since gone cold. Her eyes met his in the reflection of the coffee machine's chrome surface, silently pleading for help. The trucker shifted his weight, and Keanu's trained eye caught the outline of a concealed weapon beneath his jacket. Not an amateur's nervous gesturing, but the controlled stillness of someone who had done this before. The man's eyes never left Keanu, assessing, calculating. From the back office emerged a fifth person, another man in dark clothing who positioned himself near the refrigerator units. The store's layout had become a tactical grid in Keanu's mind. 5 civilians including Mike, 2 armed perpetrators, multiple potential weapons within reach. The coffee pot, the metal napkin dispenser, the rack of magazines that could serve as a distraction. Keanu moved toward the counter with measured steps, noting how the fluorescent lights created blind spots in the security mirrors mounted in the corners. The store's radio played soft rock music, incongruously cheerful against the suffocating tension. REO Speedwagon's "Can't Fight This Feeling" crackled through cheap speakers, almost masking the sound of a police siren in the far distance. The second armed man near the refrigerators touched his ear briefly. An earpiece, Keanu realized. They had someone outside watching for trouble. This wasn't a simple robbery. The level of organization, the timing, the chosen location near major escape routes. They were waiting for something, or someone. Time was running out. The siren grew closer, and Keanu saw the trucker's hand drift toward his concealed weapon. The next few moments would require perfect timing. One wrong move could turn this situation deadly. Keanu reached for his wallet, using the motion to step slightly to his left, positioning himself between the armed men and the closest civilian. His mind raced through scenarios, calculating angles, remembering the countless hours of combat training. But this wasn't a movie set. There would be no second takes, no stunt coordinators to ensure safety. These were real people, real lives hanging in the balance. Every decision had to be precise, every movement carefully considered. The siren's wail grew louder, and Keanu sensed the shift in the room's energy. The moment of crisis approached like an oncoming storm. Whatever these men were waiting for, whatever they had planned, was about to collide with this quiet gas station on the edge of Los Angeles. And Keanu Reeves, action star turned real-life guardian, stood as the only barrier between these civilians and whatever violence the night had in store. The approaching police siren shattered the fragile tension. The man by the refrigerators pressed his earpiece closer, his face hardening at whatever information came through. He gave a sharp nod to his partner, and suddenly the carefully orchestrated stillness exploded into chaos. The trucker pulled his weapon, but Keanu had already anticipated the movement. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the metal napkin dispenser from the counter and sent it flying. The heavy object struck the man's hand just as the gun cleared his jacket, sending the weapon clattering across the floor. Years of weapon disarming practice on movie sets had honed Keanu's timing to perfection. The second armed man rushed forward, but Keanu had already moved. He pushed the bound cashier down behind the counter's protection, simultaneously grabbing the heavy coffee pot the frozen businesswoman had been holding. The scalding liquid sprayed across the floor, creating a hazardous barrier between the armed men and the civilians. Time seemed to slow, just like in the movies, but this was different. Every movement carried real weight, real consequences. Keanu's body responded with muscle memory built from countless hours of martial arts training. He kicked a display of energy drinks toward the second attacker, forcing him to dodge and disrupting his aim. The store's radio continued its incongruous soundtrack as Keanu vaulted over the counter, positioning himself to shield Mike the cashier. The young man's eyes were wide with terror, but Keanu's presence seemed to give him courage. "Stay down," Keanu instructed, his voice carrying the same calm authority he'd learned to project on film sets during complicated action sequences. The first attacker had recovered his weapon, but Keanu had already assessed the angles. The fluorescent lights created a reflection in the security mirror, revealing the man's position without exposing Keanu. He waited for the perfect moment, timing his movement with practiced precision. As the attacker moved forward, Keanu grabbed the cash register's monitor and yanked it free, using the heavy object as both shield and weapon. The businesswoman had found her courage, swinging her briefcase at the second attacker's knee. The distraction was all Keanu needed. He launched himself forward, using techniques learned from judo training to redirect the first attacker's momentum. The man's gun arm went wide, his shot harmlessly embedding itself in the ceiling tiles. Glass shattered as the refrigerator doors took collateral damage. The sound of approaching sirens multiplied. Backup was coming. The attackers' earpieces crackled with urgent voices, their carefully planned operation unraveling. But cornered criminals were the most dangerous, and these men were professionals. Keanu noticed their tactical positioning, their practiced movements. These weren't simple robbers. Their training suggested military or specialized background. The realization made him adjust his strategy. He couldn't match their training, but he had something they didn't expect. Countless hours practicing how to move in confined spaces, how to use environment as weapon and shield. The first attacker charged, attempting to use his superior size as advantage. Keanu sidestepped, grabbing a shelf of snacks and pulling it down between them. Bags of chips exploded across the floor, creating unstable terrain. The man's combat boots slipped on the metallic packaging, sending him off balance. The second attacker had maneuvered behind the coffee station, using it as cover while trying to get a clear shot. But Keanu had already calculated this possibility. He kicked the fallen napkin dispenser, sending it sliding across the coffee-slick floor. The metal object crashed into the station's base, toppling the entire setup. The attacker barely avoided being crushed by the heavy machine. Police lights now painted the store's interior in rotating red and blue. The attackers' earpieces erupted with urgent chatter. Whatever operation they'd planned was now compromised. The first man shouted something in what sounded like military code, and his partner immediately changed tactics, moving toward the back exit. But Keanu wasn't about to let them escape with hostages. He had positioned himself between the attackers and the civilians, using his body as a shield while keeping both men in sight. The fallen shelves and scattered products had transformed the store's layout into an obstacle course that worked to his advantage. The businesswoman had managed to free Mike's hands with car keys she'd kept hidden. The young cashier immediately hit the store's emergency lockdown button, sealing the back exit. The automated security gates slammed down with a metallic crash, trapping everyone inside. The first attacker raised his weapon for a final desperate shot, but Keanu was already moving. He crossed the distance with the same explosive speed that had made his action sequences so convincing. His shoulder connected with the man's solar plexus, driving him back into the magazine rack. Decades of stage combat had taught Keanu exactly how to execute such moves without causing permanent damage, but with enough force to incapacitate. The second attacker attempted to use the confusion to reach the civilians, but Keanu had anticipated this. He swept up the fallen gun from earlier, not to shoot, but to use as a throwing weapon. The heavy object struck the man's shoulder with precision, causing him to stumble into the toppled coffee station. Police officers now surrounded the building, their spotlights illuminating the interior like a film set. But unlike a movie, the danger was still very real. The attackers were cornered, their operation in ruins, and Keanu knew from experience that this was the moment when training gave way to desperate survival instinct. He maintained his protective stance, watching both men with unwavering focus, prepared for whatever final actions they might attempt. The police spotlights turned the gas station interior into a stark arena of shadows and harsh light. Keanu maintained his protective stance between the attackers and civilians, his body language projecting a calm he'd learned to master through years of performing under pressure. The first attacker nursed his injured shoulder while the second remained sprawled among the ruins of the coffee station, both men calculating their dwindling options. Through the store's windows, SWAT team members took position, their laser sights creating a web of red dots across the interior. A negotiator's voice boomed through a megaphone, demanding surrender. The attackers exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. Keanu recognized the look. He'd seen it countless times in military advisors on film sets when discussing tactical decisions. The businesswoman had pulled Mike the cashier further behind the counter's protection, while the other customers pressed themselves against the far wall. The store's radio had finally gone silent, leaving only the hum of refrigerator units and the muffled commands from police outside. Keanu knew the next few moments would determine whether this ended peacefully or in tragedy. "Your operation's blown," Keanu said, his voice carrying the same measured authority he'd developed through countless dramatic scenes. "Whatever you were waiting for isn't coming. But right now, you've got a choice about how this ends." He kept his hands visible, his stance non-threatening but ready. The first attacker's eyes narrowed, assessing Keanu with professional calculation. The man's earpiece crackled one final time before going dead. Something in his posture shifted, the change so subtle only someone trained to watch for physical cues would notice. The tactical advantage had evaporated, and now survival instinct took over. Keanu saw the decision form in the man's eyes seconds before he acted. The attacker lunged forward, not toward the civilians but toward his fallen weapon. Keanu moved simultaneously, his foot connecting with the gun and sending it spinning beneath a display case. The man's training showed in his immediate adaptation, turning the failed grab into a combat roll that brought him back to his feet. But Keanu had anticipated this, already positioning himself to block any route to the hostages. The second attacker used this moment to make his play, pulling a hidden backup weapon from his ankle holster. But his injuries slowed him just enough. Keanu grabbed a fallen energy drink can and sent it flying with the precision of someone who'd practiced similar moves hundreds of times. The aluminum cylinder struck the man's hand, sending the small-caliber pistol skittering across the floor. SWAT team, preparing to breach. The command came through clearly now. The attackers knew their time had run out. Professional training warred with survival instinct on their faces. Keanu recognized the moment of decision approaching. He performed similar scenes, studied how men react when their options disappear. The first attacker raised his hand slowly, professional mask finally cracking. His partner followed suit seconds later. Keanu maintained his protective position as SWAT team members burst through both entrances, their movements precise and coordinated. The civilians were quickly evacuated, Mike the cashier pausing just long enough to give Keanu a grateful nod. As the attackers were secured and led away, police investigators swarmed the scene. Keanu provided his statement with the same attention to detail he gave to studying scripts, explaining each sequence of events. The investigators' expressions shifted from initial celebrity recognition to professional respect as they realized the role his actions had played in preventing tragedy. The store's security footage revealed more of the story. The attackers were former military contractors working for a private security firm. They had planned to intercept a high-value witness being transported to a safe house, using the remote gas station as a staging area. Keanu's unexpected arrival and quick action had disrupted their operation, likely saving not only the lives of those in the store but also their intended target. Outside, news vans began arriving, their bright lights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. The businesswoman spoke with reporters, describing how Keanu's calm presence had given them courage. Mike the cashier, still shaken but standing tall, recounted how the actor's swift action had turned a potential tragedy into a story of survival. Keanu declined interviews, instead spending time speaking privately with each of the civilians involved. He listened to their stories, shared quiet words of encouragement, and made sure they had support systems to help process the trauma. The police captain approached with thanks, noting how Keanu's film training had translated into real-world crisis management. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Keanu finally prepared to leave. His motorcycle waited where he'd left it at Pump 4, a silent witness to the night's events. The gas station sign still buzzed overhead, now competing with the growing daylight. Emergency vehicles cast their rotating lights across the scene, creating an almost cinematic atmosphere. The store itself bore the scars of conflict: toppled shelves, scattered products, broken glass from the refrigerator doors. But nowhere near the devastation that could have occurred if the situation had ended differently. Cleanup crews were already at work, restoring order to the chaos. The coffee machine lay on its side, a reminder of how ordinary objects had become tools of survival. Before mounting his motorcycle, Keanu spoke briefly with the station's owner, who had arrived to survey the damage. Security footage showed Keanu quietly passing the man a card with contact information for covering repair costs. No cameras captured this moment. It wasn't meant for public consumption or praise. The police escort offered to accompany him home was politely declined. As Keanu started his motorcycle's engine, a small group of emergency responders and civilians gathered to watch him leave. The rising sun caught his visor as he nodded once to the assembled group. Then, without fanfare or dramatic flourish, he merged into the early morning traffic, leaving behind a story that would be told and retold, though never by him.